4 minutes. Okay, we're rolling. So.
Right, let me tell you a little story written by Mariette Edgar for for Stanley Holloway. He used to recite them on the radio. This is Albert and the Lion. There's a famous seaside place called Blackpool that's noted for fresh air and fun. Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom went there with young Albert, their son. A grand little lad were young Albert, all dressed in his vest, quite a swell. He'd a stick with an horses at handle, the finest that Woolworths could sell. They didn't think much to the ocean, the waves they was piddling and small. There were no wrecks and nobody drowned, nothing to laugh at all. So seeking for further amusement, they paid and went into the zoo, where they'd lions and tigers and camels and old ale and sandwiches too. There were one great big lion called Wallace. His nose were all covered with scars. He lay in a somnolent posture, the side of his face on the bars. Well, Albert had heard about lions, how they was ferocious and wild, and seeing old Wallace so peaceful, it didn't seem right to the child. So straightway that brave little fella, not showing a morsel of fear, took his stick with the horse's head handle, and he pushed it in Wallace's ear. You could see that the lion didn't like it, for giving it kind of a roll, he pulled Albert inside the cage with him, and he swallowed the little lad whole. Well, Pa, who had seen the occurrence and didn't know what to do next, said, "Mother, yon lion's at Albert." And Mother said, "Well, I am vexed." So Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom, quite rightly, when all said and done, complained to the animal keeper that the lion had eaten their son. Well, the keeper were quite nice about it. He said, "What a nasty mishap. Are you sure it's your boy he's eaten?" And Pa said, "Am I sure? Here's his cap." The manager had to be sent for. He came and he said, "What's to do?" Pa told him what happened to Albert and him in his Sunday clothes too. "That's right, young feller," said Mother. "I think it's a shame and a sin for a lion to go and eat Albert, and after we paid to come in." The manager wanted no trouble. He took out his purse straight away. "How much to settle the matter?" And Pa says, "Well, how much do you usually pay?" But Mother had turned a bit awkward when she thought where her son had gone, and she said, "Somebody's got to be summonsed." So that was decided upon. So off they went to the police station in front of the magistrate chap. Pa told him what happened to Albert and proved it by showing his cap. The magistrate gave his opinion that no one was really to blame, and he hoped the Ramsbottoms would one day have further sons to their name. At this, Mother got proper blazing. "Thanks you her kindly," said she. "What, spend all our lives raising children to feed ruddy lions? Not me." End of story.
Great. That is great.
Now let me tell you a limerick. A limerick packs laughs anatomical into space that is quite economical. But the good ones I've seen are so seldom clean, and the clean ones are so seldom comical. And of course it has to be. There once was a man from Nantucket who kept all his cash in a bucket. His daughter named Nan ran away with a man, and as for the bucket, Pawtucket. But the pair followed Pa to Pawtucket. But Pa followed the pair to Pawtucket, Nan and the man in the bucket. He said to the man, "You're welcome to Nan, but as for the bucket, Pawtucket." And then the pair followed Pa to Manhasset, where he kept all his cash as an asset. But Nan and the man took the money and ran, and as for the bucket, Manhasset. That's the end of that book, but that's a quite clean one. There are others that are not quite so clean, but here's another one. There once was a lady named Lynn who thought making love was a sin, but when she was tight, it seemed quite all right, so her boyfriend just filled her with gin. There was a young girl from Cape Cod who thought babies were fashioned by God, but it was not the Almighty who lifted her nightie, it was Roger the Lodger, by God. Okay, there was this young lady who was a gold digger, let's face it. She was looking for a rich husband, so she found this fella who was not really handsome and he wasn't exactly entertaining, but he was rich, so she married him. It didn't take long before she realized that was not the smartest thing she ever did. So she went to a psychic. And the psychic was sitting there beside a little round table with a velvet cloth and a crystal ball in the middle. There were candles burning and incense, and the poor little lady got a little uneasy, but this old little psychic told her all kinds of things that how could she know about her? So she felt at ease. But then the psychic said, "But my dear," she said, "I have bad news for you. Your husband will die within the year, and it will be a sudden and tragic death." And the little girl started to wring her hands, her eyes filled with tears, and her mouth began to quiver, and she said, "Will I be acquitted?" But here's the one about the princess. I love this one. There's this beautiful princess, tall and slender, long wavy blonde hair and big blue eyes. She was walking in the woods for taking a little stroll, and there, sitting next to a pond, was a big frog. And the frog said, "Beep, beep." So the princess looked down at him and laughed, and with that, the frog jumped up. And he said, "Princess, I was once a handsome prince, but a wicked witch turned me into this frog. But one kiss from you, and I would again be a handsome prince, and you and I could marry, and my mother and I could move into your castle with you, and you could raise my children." That night, as the princess dined on frog legs gently sautéed in the finest Chardonnay and extra virgin olive oil, she said, "I don't frigging think so." And now I'm going to tell you another one. There's the lyrics to a song which were written by the Irish to commemorate James Joyce's novel, Finnegan's Wake. All right. Tim Finnegan lived in Walking Street, a gentle Irishman, mighty odd. He'd a beautiful brogue, so rich and sweet, and to rise in the world he carried a hod. But you see, he'd a sort of a tippling way. With a love for the liquor, poor Tim was born. And to help him on with his work each day, he'd a drop of the crater every morn. Well, one morning Tim felt rather full. His head felt heavy, which made him shake. He fell from the lather and he broke his skull. They carried him home, his corpse to wake. Well, they rolled him up in a nice clean sheet and they laid him out upon the bed, a gallon of whiskey at his feet and a barrel of porter at his head. His friends assembled at the wake, and Mrs. Finnegan called for lunch. First she brought out tea and cakes, then pipes, tobacco, and whiskey punch. Well, Biddy O'Brien began to cry. "Such a nice clean corpse did you ever see? Tim Mavarnin, why did you die?" "Oh, shut your gob," says Wally McGee. When Sarah O'Connor took up the job, she said, "Biddy, you're daft, I'm sure." Well, Biddy gave her a belt in the gob and sent her sprawling on the floor. Well, then a war did soon engage. 'Twas woman to woman and man to man. Shillelagh was all the rage, and a row and eruption soon began. Then Timothy O'Brien raised his head, and a gallon of whiskey flew at him. It missed and landed on the bed. The whiskey scattered over Tim. Tim revives. See how he rises? Timothy rising from the dead. "Throwing my whiskey around like blazes, son of a dude, do you think I'm dead?" We skipped the chorus to that one, which is, "Whack for the down, now dance your partner, welcome all your trotters shake. Wasn't this the truth I told you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake." Now it's time for another limerick. There once was a lady from Guam who said, "Now the sea is so calm, I'll swim for a lark." But she met a big shark. Let us now sing the 90th Psalm, which is, if you remember, "O Lord, let me count my days." There once was a soldier named Harrison whose wife had an affair with a man in the garrison. She was not oversexed or jealous or vexed. She just wanted to make a comparison. There once was a girl from Madras who had a remarkable ass. Hers was not soft, round, and pink, as you probably think. No, hers has long ears and eats grass. Though with passion's sweet pang she was wild, A young lady remained undefiled by thinking of Jesus and social diseases and the bother of having a child. And, it's time for an Irish joke. Picture this now. There's Pat and Mike out in the middle of the ocean sitting in a lifeboat, having survived the sinking of their ship. Now they rummaged through the bottom of the lifeboat to see if there was any provisions, and they found an old bottle. Well, Pat took the bottle and he rubbed it just in case there was a genie. And by God, a genie appeared. And the genie says, I am a genie, but I'm not your run-of-the-mill genie. I only offer one wish. And then you better make it quick. Well, Pat said, turn the ocean into Guinness. With a big clap of thunder, the ocean became the finest brew that man ever tasted. After a moment, Mike says, nice work, Patrick, nice work. Now we're going to have to pee in the boat. And my favorite one, Mrs. O'Shaughnessy. Mrs. O'Shaughnessy's on her way to church on a Sunday morning, and she's tripping up the steps, happy as a lark. Well, there at the top of the stairs is Father Muldoon. Well, Father Muldoon used to be there at St. Bridget's, but he was transferred down the road to St. Denis. But he does come to visit. Well, Mrs. O'Shaughnessy, love, how are you, dear? Well, just fine, thank you, Father. She says, well, he said, I married you and your husband, didn't I? Well, yes, Father, you did, she says. Well, are there any babies yet? Well, not yet, Father, not yet. Well, he said, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to Rome tomorrow. I'll light a candle for you. Thank you, Father, she said. Fast forward 7 years. Mrs. O'Shaughnessy's again on her way to church on a Sunday morning, but this time she's lumbering up the steps, very large with child. Wouldn't you know, there at the top of the stairs is Muldoon visiting again. Well, Mrs. O'Shaughnessy, love, how are you, dear? Well, obviously, Father Muldoon, I am very pregnant. This is number 6 and number 7. And he says, well, how's your husband, Mrs. O'Shaughnessy? Just fine, thank you, Father. She said, just fine. He's on his way to Rome to blow out your fucking candle. And then her neighbor came to visit. Mrs. O'Shaughnessy's out in the backyard hanging up a million diapers. And she says to the visitor, you know, she says, this only happens once out of every 439 times. And the visitor says, oh, you poor darling girl. She said, how do you find the time to do your housework? And then they got to school. They're in kindergarten, and the teacher's been giving them catechism lessons. Now she's going to give them a test. Now, children, she says, I want to know what I need to do to get to heaven. Now, if I go to church every Sunday, will I get to heaven? No, teacher. Well, if I put money in the collection box every Sunday, will I get to heaven? No, teacher. So see, they've been listening. So finally she said, all right, children, what do I have to do to get to heaven? Jimmy's in the back row, teacher, you got to fucking die. And then there's Murphy, the furniture guy. He has this little shop on O'Connell Street in Dublin. Well, this is the happening place. The young people there on a Friday night. So his business is booming. He took himself to Paris to buy a new line of furniture, which he did. Then he went to a little cafe to celebrate. He sat at a little table and he ordered a glass of wine. He's sipping his wine, proud of himself. And the place began to fill up. This is a Friday at 5 o'clock. Pretty soon there's not a single empty chair in the place except the one across from him. So at this point the door opened. A beautiful young French girl walked in. Oh, she was a lovely thing. Well, she looked around and she saw no chairs. So he hopped up and pointed to the chairs. So she came and sat down next to him. Turns out she spoke no English. He spoke no French. So he took a napkin and he drew a picture, 2 glasses of wine, and she nodded her head. They had wine. Then a 3-piece combo came along, and he drew a picture of 2 people dancing. She nodded her head. They danced. Then he took a napkin, and he drew a picture of a plate of food, kind of a crummy drawing it was, but it was a plate of food, and she nodded her head. So they went to a cafe, And they had food. They had their dinner and finished the dinner, and they had big paper napkins there. Well, she took one, and she drew a beautiful picture, a four-poster bed, complete with ruffles and the four posters. Beautiful job she did. You know, that was 40 years ago. And old Murphy still wonders, how did that young French lady know he was in the furniture business? Let's see, there's another one about... why don't I tell you a little story about the lyrics to a song about the Scotsman. A Scotsman wearing kilt left the bar one evening fair, and you could tell by how he walked he'd had more than his share. He stumbled on until he could no longer keep his feet. Then he staggered off into the grass to sleep beside the street. Well, later on, two young and lovely girls just happened by, and one said to the other with a twinkle in her eye, "See yon sleeping Scotsman, so strong and handsome built. I wonder if it's true that he wears nought beneath his kilt." So they crept up to the sleeping Scotsman, quiet as could be, and they lifted up his kilt about an inch so they could see. And there, behold, for them to view, beneath his Scottish skirt, was nothing more than God had blessed him with upon his birth. Well, they marveled for a moment, and then one said, "We'd best be gone, but let's leave him a souvenir before we move along." So as a gift, they left a blue silk ribbon tied into a bow. Around the bonny star the Scots kilt lifted showed. When Scotsman wakes to nature's call, he stumbles toward the trees. He lifts up his kilt, and he gawks at what he sees. In a startled voice, he says to what's before his eyes, "Well, lad, I don't know where you've been, but I see you won first prize." You've heard how young Albert Ramsbottom, in the zoo up at Blackpool last year, took his stick with the horses and then gave Lion a poke in the ear. The name of the lion were Wallace. The poke in the ear made him wild, and before you could say Bob's your uncle, he'd up and he'd swallow the child. He were sorry the moment he'd done it. With children, he'd always been chums. And besides, he'd no teeth in his noggin, and he couldn't chew Albert on the gums. He could feel Albert moving inside him as he lay on his bed of dried ferns. And you'd think it were little lad's birthday. He wished him such happy returns. But Albert kept kicking and fighting till Wallace arose with a plan. 'Twas time to make a comeback for the lad. So with his head down in the corner, on his front paws, he started to walk. And he coughed and he sneezed and he gargled till Albert shot out like a cork. Well, Wallace felt better directly. His figure once more became lean, and the only difference with Albert were his hands and his face were quite clean. Meantime, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom had gone home to tea feeling blue. Ma said, "I feel down in the mouth like," and Pa said, I bet Albert does too. And Ma said, "It just goes for to show you the future cannot be revealed. If I'd known we were going to lose him, I'd have not had his boots soled and healed." And Pa said, "Let's look at the bright side. What can't be helped must be endured." We did have young Albert insured. As soon as a knock on the door came at the moment that Father these kind words did speak, 'twere the young man from the Prudential, come for his tuppence per person per week. When Pa saw who had been knocking, he laughed, and he kept laughing so. The young man said, "Well, what's there to laugh at?" And Pa said, "You'll laugh and all when you know." And Mother said, "Excuse him for laughing, but sometimes things happen so strange. Our Albert's been et by a lion. You'll have to pay us for a change." Said the young man from the Prudential, Come, don't tell me this. You don't mean to tell me you've lost him." And Ma said, "Oh, no, we know where he is." When the young man had heard all the details, he took out his purse straight away, and he paid him with interest and bonus the sum of £9 4 and 2. Well, Pa scarce had his hand on the money when a face at the window they see. And Ma said, Look, it's Albert." And Pa said, "Aye, it would be." So Albert came in all excited and started his story to give. And Pa said, "I'll never trust lions again, not as long as I live. the young man from the Prudential to pick up the money began, and Pa said, wait just a moment, don't be in a hurry, young man. Then giving young Albert a shilling, he said, here, pop off back to the zoo. Here's your stick with the horses and handle. Go see what the tigers can do.